Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching it from? And what are you doing right now? I hope you enjoyed this story. As the world outside fades away and the night gently wraps around you, take a moment to settle in. Let the quiet sounds of the world calm your mind and breathe in deeply, allowing the warmth of this moment to settle into your bones. In this space, there is no rush, no noise, only stillness, and a story that has been waiting for you. As you listen, let your thoughts drift like soft clouds on a quiet evening as the rain outside taps its rhythm and the comforting glow of the lamplight invites you to remember something important. You may not know exactly what it is, but you'll feel it deep inside. Feel free to make yourself comfortable, perhaps with a blanket, a cup of something warm, or simply your thoughts. This is your time, your moment to let go. We are here together, under the soft glow of the lamplight. Let the story begin, and let yourself be carried into a peaceful sleep. The night is waiting. Let it tell you a story. The rain had been falling for hours, soaking every stone, every rooftop, and every scrap of forgotten paper littering the narrow streets. It wasn't a violent rain, the kind that comes with roaring thunder and flashing skies, but a steady, relentless drizzle, as if the heavens were sighing endlessly onto the earth. The old city wore the rain like a second skin, its ancient cobblestones slick with water, the yellow light from the street lamps turning each puddle into a trembling mirror. You pulled your jacket tighter around yourself, feeling the weight of the damp fabric cling to your shoulders. The streets were unusually silent tonight, even for this part of town. Normally, you could expect the occasional rattle of a distant tram or the muted laughter of late-night wanderers. But tonight, it was only you, the rain, and the whisper of the wind curling around the corners of shuttered buildings. Your boots splashed lightly through shallow pools, each step echoing quietly in the narrow alleyways you knew so well. It wasn't the most glamorous job, being a postal worker assigned to the forgotten edges of the city. Yet there was a strange peace to it, an odd satisfaction in moving silently from door to door, delivering words from one soul to another. Tonight should have been like any other night, a few last-minute parcels tucked under your arm, a handful of letters cradled against your chest, the promise of a warm room and dry clothes waiting for you once your route was done. But something was different. You felt it before you saw it. A subtle shift in the air, like a chord struck ever so slightly out of tune. The alley you entered was narrower than most, squeezed between two leaning buildings that seemed to sigh against each other for support. A single lamplight buzzed overhead, its glow weak and watery against the curtain of rain. The puddles here were deeper, reflecting the dull yellow light in broken fragments. And there, lying in the very center of the path, was a letter. You stopped, heart ticking a little faster for reasons you couldn't quite explain. In all your nights traversing these streets, you had never once seen a letter simply abandoned like this, especially not one that looked so deliberate. It wasn't soggy or torn by the rain as you might expect. Instead, it sat pristine atop a dry patch of cobblestone, untouched by the dampness that surrounded it, as though the world had been carefully arranged to preserve it. Cautiously, you stepped forward, the rain tapping softly against your hood. You crouched and reached out, fingers brushing the envelope's surface. The paper was thick and finely made, more like parchment than the cheap office paper you handled daily. Its texture was smooth but old, as if it had been crafted long ago by someone who still believed letters were meant to be lasting things. You turned the envelope over in your hands. No stamp. No address. No recipient's name. Nothing at all except a faint, almost imperceptible line of writing along the sealed edge at the back. For the one who remembers. The words were so small and delicately written that you had to squint to see them through the rain. Ink bled slightly around the curves of the letters, suggesting it had been written by hand, lovingly, perhaps hurriedly. A prickling sensation crept up your spine. You straightened up and glanced around, but the alley remained empty, watched over only by the flickering lamp above. No movement in the shadows. No sound but the rain in your own breathing. You hesitated. There were rules about this kind of thing. A postal worker's duty was clear. Unmarked parcels and letters were to be turned into the lost and found at the main office, logged and stored, filed away into oblivion where no one would ever bother to look for them again. It was a simple system. Efficient. Logical. You stood there, frozen by something illogical and ineffable, the feeling that this letter wasn't meant to be discarded into some dusty archive. You tucked it carefully into the inner pocket of your jacket, where it rested against your chest, warm and strangely heavy. Your feet moved of their own accord, leading you deeper into the alley, the letter's presence a silent guide at your core. Though the path was familiar, tonight it felt subtly altered, like the stones beneath your boots had shifted slightly, or the corners of buildings had tilted inward, inviting you forward. The city's heartbeat seemed to slow as you walked. The ever-present hum of life dulled into something quieter, more intimate. It was as if the world itself had drawn a breath and was holding it, waiting. Another turn, another flickering street lamp. The light here was even dimmer, casting long, trembling shadows that stretched and shivered as the rain thickened. You could smell the wet stone, the faint, lingering trace of old smoke from a distant chimney, and something else, something faintly sweet, like the ghost of a flower that had once bloomed here. You stopped beneath another lamp and glanced upward. Its glass casing was cracked, a jagged line running through it like a scar. Inside, the bulb buzzed weakly, threatening to go out with every gust of damp wind. In that trembling light, you thought you saw a figure at the end of the alley, a flash of pale fabric, a glimpse of movement, but when you blinked, there was nothing there. Only the rain, the shadows, and the quiet thrum of your own pulse. You shook your head, a wry smile tugging at the corner of your mouth. Long hours, cold rain, and an overactive imagination made for strange company. Better to finish your route quickly and put this odd little adventure behind you. Yet as you turned to leave, the letter pressed insistently against your chest, as if reminding you that you had already been chosen for something. That turning away wasn't really an option anymore. You exhaled slowly, letting the misty breath drift up into the rainy air. Tonight was different. You didn't know how yet, or why, but you could feel it. The city, the rain, the flickering lamps, they were all whispering something just beyond the reach of your understanding. And somewhere, hidden in the weaving streets and glistening stones, a story was waiting for you to find it. With one last glance at the wet, shimmering alley, you pulled your jacket tighter, adjusted your cap against the drizzle, and moved forward into the uncertain night. The letter thumped gently with each heartbeat. It was only the beginning. The letter weighed heavily in your jacket pocket as you made your way out of the narrow alley. The night had grown colder, and though the rain still fell in a lazy mist, it carried a sharper bite now, seeping through your clothes, prickling against your skin. Yet it wasn't the cold that unsettled you. It was the letter. The way it seemed to hum softly against your heart, like a living thing waiting to be acknowledged. You reached the main street, broader and lined with crumbling brick buildings that leaned into the road like old men with bad backs. The shops were shuttered, their windows dark. Only a few lamps still burned, their light casting sleepy halos on the slick pavement. You paused under one of them, letting the glow seep into your bones as you retrieved the letter once again. There it was, just as before, pale parchment, the faint writing on the seal, for the one who remembers. No address. No return sender. No instructions. Just that one quiet plea. You rubbed your thumb gently over the seal, tracing the curve of the handwritten letters. In your mind, you imagined the person who had written it, perhaps with careful hands, perhaps with trembling ones. Had they hesitated, like you did now? Had they looked at the world and hoped that somewhere, someone would find this? Someone who would remember. You thought about returning it immediately, a following procedure. The post office would still be open, the night shift supervisor thumbing through paperwork in the warm, dry interior. It would be easy, walk 2 blocks south, ring the bell, fill out a form, and hand over the strange little mystery to be catalogued and forgotten. But your feet remained planted under the lamplight. A low gust of wind swept past, carrying the scent of rain and old stone, and something more elusive, something like memory. You knew then, deep down, that if you turned your back on this letter, you would regret it. The kind of regret that settled into your bones and whispered to you in sleepless hours. The kind of regret that made you wonder about all the stories you never dared to live. You slid the letter back into your jacket and began to walk, not south toward the post office, but east, deeper into the city's older quarter where the streets were thinner, the houses lower, and the air carried the weight of history. Your route took you past familiar landmarks, the crumbling library with ivy clawing at its facade, the dry fountain in the center of an abandoned square, the old bell tower that hadn't rung in years but still seemed to watch over the streets like a patient sentinel. Each place felt different tonight, tinged with something just beyond the reach of words, like walking through a dream half remembered from another life. You weren't sure what you were looking for. A sign, perhaps. A feeling. A memory. At the end of a crooked side street, you spotted an old bench beneath another weary street lamp. Its paint was peeling, and the iron legs were rusted, but it stood firm against the years. You sat down with a sigh, letting the rain patter gently against your hat, your shoulders. You reached for the letter again, almost without thinking, and turned it over in your hands. Should you open it? The thought had crossed your mind several times, each stronger than the last. But a deeper instinct held you back. This letter wasn't addressed to you, not really. It wasn't yours to tear open like an impatient child unwrapping a gift. It was a trust, placed into the world with hope. To break that trust felt wrong. No, if you were going to understand this, it had to be the right way. You thought about who might have lost it. Perhaps some elderly woman who lived alone in one of the apartments above the bakery. Or a traveling musician who slipped it from his coat while hurrying through the rain. Or maybe a different, stranger idea stirred in your mind. Maybe the letter hadn't been lost at all. Maybe it had been waiting. For you. The thought sent a gentle shiver down your spine, but it wasn't fear that moved you. It was a kind of wonder, the rare kind that made the world seem deeper, wider, filled with secret meanings just waiting to be discovered. You leaned back against the bench, tilting your head to look up at the sky. The The clouds hung low and heavy, but here and there, thin cracks revealed slivers of darker blue beyond. The rain had slowed now, reduced to a fine mist that kissed your face lightly with each breeze. In the quiet, you heard the faintest sound, a soft tapping, as if someone walking in the distance. You sat up, straining to listen. There, down the street, almost too far to see, was a figure moving slowly through the foggy rain. They were hunched slightly, wrapped in a long coat, their head bowed against the cold. You watched them, heart thudding. Something about their silhouette stirred a feeling you couldn't name. Without thinking, you rose from the bench and began to follow. The figure never looked back, but neither did they quicken their pace, as though they were leading you somewhere, not fleeing. You stayed well back, your footsteps as quiet as the rain itself. Block after block slipped by. You passed shuttered storefronts, faded posters peeling from lampposts, windows glowing faintly with the last embers of household light. The figure remained ahead, just barely visible, always just at the edge of your sight. At last, they turned sharply and vanished into a narrow alley you didn't recognize. You hurried to catch up, heart pounding, not with fear, but with a strange, breathless anticipation. When you reached the corner, the alley was empty. Only a single doorway stood there, recessed into the stone wall, marked by a wooden plaque so old the writing had nearly faded into nothing. You stepped closer and wiped a sleeve across the wood, revealing a faint inscription. Remembrance House. You stared at the words, a chill running down your spine. They resonated with the message on the letter, for the one who remembers. You hadn't seen this place before. And yet, somehow, standing there, you felt you had known it all your life. The heavy wooden door creaked slightly as you pushed it open. Beyond, a warm glow beckoned, casting long, soft shadows across the worn wooden floor. You stepped inside, letting the door side close behind you. The letter burned warmly against your heart. The night was not finished yet, and neither was the story. The door to Remembrance House closed with a sound softer than you expected, almost like a sigh disappearing into the warm hush of the room beyond. You stood still for a moment, dripping rainwater onto the aged floorboards, taking in the strange new world that unfolded before you. It was not what you imagined it would be. In your mind, you had conjured dim hallways and dust-choked rooms, the forgotten smell of mildew clinging to cracked walls. But instead, the space was clean and quiet, bathed in a gentle amber glow from oil lamps mounted at intervals along the walls. The air smelled faintly of old paper, beeswax, and a subtle hint of lavender. Directly ahead stretched a long corridor lined with doors, each one bearing a brass number worn smooth with time. At the end of the hallway, another lamp flickered weakly, barely holding back the deeper shadows that pooled like mist beyond its reach. For a moment, you simply stood there, the letter a steady presence against your chest, as if reminding you why you had come. You moved forward slowly, your footsteps absorbed by the soft, threadbare runner that stretched down the center of the corridor. As you passed each door, you glanced sideways at them, wondering who, or what, might lie beyond. There was no sound from within. No voices, no creaking floorboards, not even the whisper of breathing. It was as if the entire place was holding its breath, waiting for something. Waiting for you. Your fingers brushed against the letter hidden inside your jacket. The pulse of its mystery beat steadily against your skin, urging you onward. Halfway down the corridor, you noticed something odd, a door slightly ajar, its brass number, 17, hanging crookedly by a single screw. A faint thread of colder air seeped through the gap, brushing your ankles like a cat's tail. Against every sensible instinct, you found yourself stepping closer, drawn by something you couldn't name. You pushed the door open with 2 fingers, the hinges creaking softly in the otherwise profound silence. Inside was a small, simple room. A single chair sat by the window, its seat facing outward toward the rain-darkened street beyond. The window was cracked slightly open, letting in the cool mist of the night. On a narrow table beside the chair, illuminated by the buttery light of a lone candle, lay an old photograph. You entered slowly, the wooden floor gently protesting your weight. Approaching the table, you peered down at the photograph. It showed a girl, young, perhaps no older than 16. Her hair was dark and fell in soft waves around her shoulders, framing a face that held a delicate, almost wistful beauty. She wasn't smiling. Her expression was thoughtful, as if she were listening to some distant melody only she could hear. There was something achingly familiar about her, though you knew you had never seen her before. Beneath the photograph, penned in the same careful handwriting as the letter's seal, was a simple caption. Liana. Waiting. The name stirred something deep within you, a ripple across the still pond of your memory. Liana. It rang like an echo inside your chest, awakening a strange sadness you didn't understand. You picked up the photograph gently, the edges worn soft by countless touches, and sat down in the chair by the window. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm, and the lamplight blurred against the mist. For a long time, you sat there, holding the photograph, the letter pressing warm against your heart, the candle flame swaying slightly with the draft. You didn't know what you were waiting for. A voice? A sign? Perhaps even a ghost to materialize before you. But the room remained silent, save for the low murmur of the world beyond the cracked window. At last, you stood and returned the photograph to the table. You knew, somehow, that Liana was connected to the letter you had found. And not just in some superficial way. The connection ran deeper, threading through years, through forgotten promises, through stories buried by time and rain. You turned from the room, leaving the door ajar as you had found it, and continued down the corridor. At the very end of the hall, you discovered another door. This one was different, not numbered, but carved with intricate symbols, vines, stars, and a river flowing endlessly across the wood. The doorknob was an old iron ring, cold and rough beneath your fingers. You hesitated. Then, with a breath drawn deep and slow, you pulled the door open. Beyond was not another hallway, but a stairwell leading downward into darkness. A draft rose up from the depths, carrying the scent of earth and stone, and something else beneath it. Something sad and sweet, like the memory of a lullaby half forgotten. You descended slowly, one hand trailing along the wall, the stairs uneven beneath your feet. The further down you went, the more the world above seemed to fade away, replaced by the thick, tangible silence of something ancient and waiting. At the bottom, the stairway opened into a large, circular chamber. Candles flickered along the walls, set into niches carved into the stone. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it, an old, battered notebook. You approached it cautiously, feeling the weight of invisible eyes watching you, not with menace, but with a desperate, yearning hope. The notebook was bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed and fragile. You opened it carefully, heart pounding. Inside, every page was filled with writing, hundreds of names, hundreds of short notes, each one a fragment of a life, unweighted by the old fountain. I lit a candle at the second lamplight. I left my promise in the rain, and scattered among them over and over again the name, Liana. Sometimes just her name, sometimes accompanied by a date, a place, a short plea. Forgive me, Liana. I couldn't find you, Liana. Still waiting, Liana. You turned page after page, your breath catching at the immensity of it, the sorrow, the longing, the countless voices echoing through time. At the very end of the notebook, on the last page, a single line had been scrawled in hurried, uneven ink. She waits for the one who remembers. Under the lamplight, in the rain. You closed the notebook gently, your mind reeling. The letter had not found you by accident. It had been waiting, just as she had. A shiver passed through you, but it wasn't fear. It was a solemn understanding, a quiet acceptance of the path you had unknowingly stepped onto. You placed a hand over your heart, feeling the steady beat beneath the letter. Outside, somewhere beyond these ancient walls, the lamplight still flickered, and the rain still whispered across the stones. And you knew now. You had to find her. Before the night ended. Before the memory of the promise faded forever. You turned and climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last, carrying the weight of a mystery as old as the city itself. The story was not yet over. It was only just beginning. The stairwell released you back into the soft amber light of the corridor, though it felt dimmer now, less certain, as if the house itself had shifted while you were gone. You stood there for a moment at the threshold, adjusting to the quiet, feeling the notebook's heavy memory lingering on your skin like mist. You pressed your hand lightly against your jacket, where the letter still rested close to your heart. The night outside awaited you. You could feel it, the rain whispering against the windows, the lamplight bending through the mist. Somewhere out there, Liana was waiting too, caught between the hush of the rain and the fading warmth of forgotten promises. The door behind you creaked faintly, a small nudge of sound that seemed to encourage you onward. You stepped forward. The hallway stretched before you in silent patience. Each footstep you took was soft but certain now, your purpose guiding you more clearly than before. The walls no longer felt oppressive. Instead, they seemed to lean in gently, as if watching over you, acknowledging your choice to follow the path that had been laid so long ago. You retraced your steps through Remembrance House, finding your way back to the main door without effort, though it felt like you were moving through a different world than the one you had entered earlier. When you pushed the heavy wooden door open, the night greeted you with a cool breath and the soft kiss of misty rain. The world beyond had shifted too, the streets, the lamplight, even the very air carried the feeling of an old story stirring awake. You stepped outside. The door whispered shut behind you with a final, gentle sigh. Standing there on the slick cobblestones, you looked around. The city wore its nighttime skin like a secret, full of hidden pathways and silent witnesses. Each puddle reflected the trembling stars overhead, each lamp glowed like a beacon in the vast, breathing quiet. You didn't need a map. You didn't need directions. You simply listened. There, carried on the back of the rain and the whispering wind, a sound. Faint, nearly lost, but there. A soft humming. A lullaby you couldn't quite place, familiar and yet just out of reach. You turned toward it instinctively, walking without rushing, letting the sound guide you. The streets curled around you, narrower and older now. You passed buildings that leaned so closely together that the sky above became a mere ribbon of darkness. Your footsteps echoed softly, mingling with the steady drip of water from overhanging eaves. The city seemed to hold its breath as you moved. At a small intersection where 3 alleys met, you paused. A single street lamp stood there, its light flickering uncertainly, casting long, stretching shadows that danced lazily across the wet ground. And beneath that lamp stood a figure. You almost missed her at first, so still and slight she seemed a part of the mist itself. But as you stepped closer, you saw her more clearly, a young woman in a pale dress, soaked through by the rain yet untouched by the cold. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks in damp tendrils. She stood barefoot, her toes curling slightly against the wet stone, and in her hand she clutched something small and delicate. She was humming. The sound wrapped around you, drawing you forward until you were standing just at the edge of the light. Close enough to see her eyes, wide and solemn, reflecting the lamplight like twin moons. She looked up at you then, her humming fading into silence. For a heartbeat, neither of you spoke. The letter in your jacket pulsed against your chest, warm and insistent. You reached into your coat, your movements slow and reverent, and drew it out. The girl, Liana, watched you with an expression so fragile, so full of aching hope, that you found yourself blinking against the sudden sting of tears. You stepped forward, into the circle of lamplight, and held the letter out to her with both hands. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. Then, with a shivering breath, she reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed yours, cool and feather-light, like the touch of falling rain. As soon as the letter passed between you, the air around you seemed to shift. The rain thickened slightly, wrapping the two of you in a soft, private veil. The sounds of the city faded into nothing. It was only you and Liana now, standing together under the thin halo of golden light. She turned the letter over in her hands, her eyes tracing the words on the seal with a kind of reverent wonder. A small smile, tremulous and full of ancient sadness, touched her lips. Without a word, she broke the seal. You held your breath. She unfolded the letter carefully, as if afraid it might crumble into dust. Her eyes moved over the words inside, and as she read, something changed in her. The tension in her shoulders melted away. Her breath slowed, deepened. A light, so soft it seemed born from within her rather than from the lamp above, began to glow in her eyes. When she finished reading, she pressed the letter to her heart and closed her eyes. The moment hung suspended between you, delicate as the mist that clung to the world. Finally, she opened her eyes again and looked at you. Her voice, when she spoke, was a whisper so light it almost wasn't a voice at all, but a feeling carried on the air. "Thank you," she said. You opened your mouth to reply, but no words came. You only nodded, feeling the weight of a promise you hadn't even known you made finally lift from your shoulders. Liana smiled again, a smile that seemed to hold lifetimes, seasons, memories you hadn't yet lived. Then, slowly, she stepped back into the mist. You watched her go, not daring to follow, not needing to. As she moved away from the lamplight, her form grew more and more translucent, blending with the mist and rain, until finally, she was gone, as if she had never been there at all. You stood alone under the lamp. The letter was gone from your hands, and yet you felt lighter, more whole than you had in years. As if a missing piece of your heart had been returned without you even realizing it had been lost. The city around you stirred awake again, the soft gurgle of water in the gutters, the far-off creak of a sign swinging in the wind, the faint hum of distant footsteps. The rain fell steadily, washing the world clean, And somewhere deep inside you, a quiet voice whispered that you had done the right thing. You turned slowly, feeling no urgency now, and began to walk back through the rain-slick streets. The night, though still dark, no longer felt heavy. The lamplight stretched before you in soft, welcoming pools, and the rain, once cold and biting, now felt gentle against your skin. There was still more to understand, more of the story to unfold. But for now, you walked slowly, peacefully, letting the night carry you forward, one step at a time, under the whispers of the lamplight. The city received you again with quiet arms, its narrow streets winding like ancient veins through a body long at rest. After Liana's disappearance into the mist, the rain had softened to a misty drizzle, almost as if the very sky had been holding its breath and was now finally allowed to exhale. You walked without hurry, your boots making muted sounds against the damp stone. Around you, the lamps continued their solemn vigil, their golden glow bleeding into the dark, pooling at the edges of puddles, running along the shining curves of gutters. The night was no longer the heavy, uncertain thing it had been when you first found the letter. It felt lighter now, reverent, carrying an unspoken understanding that something important had been restored. Yet, as your steps carried you further into the city's quiet heart, a new feeling began to stir inside you. Not fear, not sadness, curiosity. There was more, you sensed, more to this story than the simple act of returning a forgotten letter. You could feel it, just beyond the edges of what your eyes could see, a tension, a pull, as if the night itself was urging you to keep moving, to keep listening. And so you did. You let the city guide you. Past shuttered windows and sleeping houses, past twisted iron fences and forgotten courtyards choked with ivy. You turned when the air thickened slightly, you paused when the rain changed its rhythm, and you followed the subtle currents that tugged at the edges of your senses. It was not long before you found yourself in a part of the city you did not recognize. Here, the streets grew narrower still, the buildings hunched and leaning together like old women murmuring secrets over tea. Vines crawled up the stone walls, their leaves slick and shining under the lamplight. A low mist hugged the ground, swirling lazily around your ankles with every step you took. Up ahead, you spotted a door. It was set back slightly from the street, framed by a narrow archway of crumbling brick, almost hidden behind a curtain of overgrown ivy. At first, you thought it was simply another forgotten building, abandoned like so many others you had passed. But something about the way the mist clung to it, the way the lamplight hesitated just before reaching it, made you stop. The door was ajar. Only a sliver, just wide enough for a single breath of air to slip through. You stood there for a moment, the rain tickling the back of your neck, the night holding perfectly still around you. A part of you, the part that remembered warm fires and safe beds, urged you to keep walking. To leave the mysteries of this city to the mist and shadows where they belonged. But a stronger part of you, the part that had taken the letter into your hands without hesitation, the part that had followed the echoes of a lullaby into the rain, told you to stay. To look. To listen. Slowly, you approached the door. The closer you got, the clearer it became that this place had been forgotten for a long time. The wood of the door was weathered and cracked, the iron handle rusted to a deep, earthy red. The vines crept over the threshold, curling like sleeping fingers around the stone floor just inside. You reached out and pushed the door gently open. It swung inward without a sound. Inside, darkness waited, deep and rich, like the velvet folds of an old theater curtain. The air smelled of damp stone, aged wood, and something faintly sweet, like dried flowers left too long in a vase. You hesitated only a moment longer before stepping through. The door closed softly behind you, sealing the night out. At first, you could see nothing. Only the steady sound of your own breathing, the rain whispering against the walls outside. Then, slowly, your eyes adjusted. You found yourself in a long, narrow room. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, heavy with objects you couldn't quite make out in the dimness: books, bottles, faded photographs, and cracked frames. Everything coated in a fine layer of dust that shimmered faintly whenever your breath stirred the air. In the center of the room stood a table, and on the table lay another letter. You approached cautiously, your footsteps almost noiseless against the old wood floor. The closer you came, the more you could see. The letter was sealed in the same wax as the one you had found before, stamped with that same intricate emblem: the river, the stars, the vines. Beside it rested a small brass key, delicate and ornate, its surface green with age. You reached out and touched the letter. The wax was cold beneath your fingertips, but the letter itself felt warm, as if it had been waiting for you, holding a small ember of hope through all the long, empty years. You picked it up. Unlike the first letter, this one bore an address, scrawled across the front in the same graceful, looping hand: to the one who listens. Your heart gave a small, curious flutter. Carefully, you tucked the letter into your jacket beside the empty place where Liana's had rested. Then you picked up the key. It was heavier than you expected, the metal cool and solid in your palm. As you turned it over, studying the delicate carvings along its handle, a thought stirred in your mind: this key was not meant for any ordinary door. It was a key to something else. Something deeper. Something older. You slipped it into your pocket and looked around the room once more. Everything about this place felt heavy with waiting, as if it were a library of forgotten promises, a storeroom for memories that had been too precious to abandon and too painful to remember. You noticed then a faint trail of footprints in the dust, leading from the table to a shadowed archway at the far end of the room. They were small and delicate, as if made by someone barefoot. Liana? Or someone else entirely? Without allowing yourself time to second guess, you followed the trail. Through the archway, into another corridor. This one was narrower still, the walls pressing close, the ceiling so low you had to duck your head. The air grew colder as you moved forward, the mist outside seeming to seep into the very stones. At the end of the corridor, another door waited. This one was different, made of heavy iron, its surface etched with intricate patterns that matched the emblem on the letters and the key. You reached into your pocket and drew out the brass key. It slid easily into the lock. For a moment, you hesitated, your fingers resting lightly against the key's cold surface. You thought of Liana, standing barefoot under the lamplight. You thought of the notebook filled with aching messages left for her across countless years. You thought of the rain, and the whispers, and the promises that tied themselves like invisible threads through the heart of the city. Then, with a slow breath, you turned the key. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed far too loud in the hush of the world. The door swung inward, revealing a darkness deeper than anything you had yet encountered. But you did not hesitate. You stepped through, into the next chapter of the mystery, into whatever waited beyond. And as you did, the rain outside the old house began to fall a little harder, drumming a steady rhythm against the stones, like a heartbeat calling you forward, whispering that the story was not over. Not yet. The door closed behind you with a hush, as if the night itself had sealed you into a secret only it could keep. For a moment, you stood very still, letting the darkness settle around you like a second skin. It wasn't an empty darkness, nor a cruel one. It had the dense, soft quality of something ancient, like velvet that had absorbed years of whispered conversations. You took a careful step forward. Underfoot, the ground shifted, not the hard cobblestone of the streets or the smooth wood of the old house, but something else. The floor here was laid with thick, worn carpet, muffling your steps until even your own presence seemed only half real. A few paces ahead, a light bloomed. It wasn't harsh or sudden. Rather, it glowed to life slowly, as if stirred awake by your presence, revealing a wide room at the heart of the building. You moved closer. The room was circular, the walls curved inward like the hollow of a great, cupped hand. Along the perimeter, shelves rose up, filled not with books this time, but with objects, tiny glass bottles with curled labels, clocks whose hands moved backward, faded ribbons tied in delicate bows. Each item seemed placed with immense care, as though preserving it was a matter of honor. In the center of the room was a table. And upon that table, under the gentle halo of a single hanging lamp, lay a collection of papers, photographs, and delicate trinkets. All carefully arranged, as though waiting for someone to come and remember them. You stepped closer, drawn by the quiet gravity of it all. The photographs caught your eye first, black and white, their edges curled with age. You picked one up delicately. It showed a group of people gathered in front of a building that looked remarkably like Remembrance House. Their faces were blurred by the passage of time, but you could make out the outlines of smiles, the tilt of a head caught mid-laugh, the soft blur of a hand waving. Among them, a young girl stood slightly apart, her posture stiff, her smile uncertain. You recognized her immediately. Liana. She looked younger than the figure you had seen under the lamplight, just a child, her dress too big for her frame, her shoes scuffed. But it was unmistakably her. Even through the blur of the old photograph, there was something in her eyes, something searching. You set the photograph down gently and turned your attention to the papers. Letters, some half-finished, others never sent. One, written in a neat but trembling hand, read, "I will wait until the rain stops. I will wait under the old lamplight, like you said. I believe you will come, even if the whole city forgets me." The words prickled at your skin, stirring something deep and aching inside you. Another letter bore only a single sentence. Sometimes promises stretch so thin they become almost invisible, but they never truly break. You let the paper fall from your fingers, your breath misting softly in the stillness. There were more items on the table, a locket, still warm from some memory you couldn't quite grasp, a music box, silent but heavy with unplayed notes, a pair of delicate gloves, one stained at the fingertips. Each object hummed with the weight of unspoken stories, small monuments to a girl who had been lost not just in body, but in memory too. At the far edge of the table, something else caught your eye. A journal. It was bound in deep blue leather, the cover worn and softened by countless hands. You opened it carefully, the pages crackling slightly as they turned. Inside, entries written in different hands filled the book, as if many people over the years had added their thoughts, their regrets, their hopes. One entry, dated many years ago, read, "If you find this, know that she is still waiting. That promises made in love do not dissolve with time. Help her remember. Help us all remember." Another. I saw her again last night, standing under the lamp. She smiled at me, but when I stepped closer, she was gone. Maybe one day she'll stay. And another. The rain brings her back. Don't be afraid. She is the memory the city forgot, but not the heart. You closed the journal gently, your fingertips lingering on the cover. A sense of quiet understanding settled over you. This was not just about a missing girl. It was about a city that had lost a part of itself. A city that had grown so busy, so worn, that it had forgotten the promises it made to remember, to wait, to hope. Liana was not merely a lost child. She was a thread woven through the fabric of this place, a living echo of a time when promises mattered more than practicality, when hope outshone weariness. You looked around the room again, seeing it now not as a tomb but as a living memory, a heart still beating in the quiet spaces between the rain. And then you noticed it. On the far side of the room, half hidden behind a shelf, another door. This one was not locked. It stood slightly open, a thin beam of silver light slicing through the darkness beyond it. You felt the pull again, gentle but insistent. The key in your pocket seemed to pulse softly, but you no longer needed it here. This door required something different to open, a willingness, a memory, a promise of your own. You moved toward it slowly, your steps soundless on the thick carpet. As you reached the doorway, the light beyond grew stronger, clearer. You paused, your hand resting lightly against the edge of the doorframe. Beyond this point, you sensed, lay the answers you hadn't even known you were searching for. A deeper truth, waiting like a buried river beneath the city's familiar streets. You thought again of Liana, of her bare feet in the rain, her wide eyes, the way her smile had carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken hopes. You had brought her letter back to her. But the story was not over. It had only just begun. With a slow, steady breath, you stepped through the doorway. And the world shifted once more, not with a jolt, but with the soft, inevitable motion of a tide returning home. The rain outside thickened again, a gentle drumbeat against the old stones. The city leaned in closer, listening. And somewhere, just at the edge of hearing, a lullaby began to rise, not sung by one voice alone, but by many, stitched together by memory, by hope, by the soft, enduring promise of the lamplight. You followed the song into the silver light, and the door swung shut behind you with the gentlest whisper. The silver light welcomed you gently, wrapping around your shoulders like a worn, familiar blanket. It was a light that seemed to hum with something old, not ancient in the way ruins were ancient, but ancient the way lullabies are, passed from voice to voice, never truly forgotten, only waiting to be sung again. You stepped forward slowly. The world beyond the door was unlike any part of the city you had seen before. It was a garden, but not one crafted by human hands. The trees were tall and thin, their trunks pale as bone, their leaves translucent and shimmering as if cut from mist itself. The ground was soft beneath your boots, carpeted in moss that glowed faintly with every step you took. The rain had followed you here, but it had changed. It no longer fell from above, but seemed to rise from the earth in small, glittering motes, drifting upward like stars escaping gravity. At the center of the garden stood a figure. You recognized her even before your mind caught up with your heart. Liana. But this time she was different. She wore the same simple dress, though it seemed to ripple as if woven from light and rain. Her hair floated around her like a dark halo, her bare feet barely touching the moss. She turned as you approached, and her eyes, those same wide, searching eyes, met yours. There was no fear in her gaze, only a deep, quiet recognition, as if she had been waiting for you, and you alone. You stopped a few steps away, unsure whether to speak, unsure whether words even belonged in this sacred, breathless place. But Liana smiled, a small, sad, hopeful smile, and beckoned you closer. You obeyed, drawn by something more powerful than understanding. When you were close enough, she held out her hand. You reached into your jacket and withdrew the second letter, the one addressed simply to the one who listens. The paper, though worn and creased from your journey, seemed to glow softly in the garden's light, as if it too had been waiting for this moment. Liana took it from you with a touch so light it barely disturbed the air. She cradled the letter against her chest, closed her eyes, and breathed. The garden responded. The mist leaves trembled. The trees leaned closer. The stars that floated from the moss spun faster, as if carried by an invisible current of joy. And when Liana opened her eyes again, they were shining. "Thank you," she said, her voice like the first true note of a song long forgotten. It was a voice so soft that it barely reached your ears, yet it filled the entire garden with warmth. You tried to answer, but the words tangled in your throat, too heavy with the weight of the moment. Instead, you nodded. Liana smiled again, and for the first time, it was a smile unburdened by loneliness. Then, very gently, she turned and gestured for you to follow. Together, you moved through the garden. As you walked, more figures began to appear between the mist trees. At first just shapes, blurred and wavering. Then faces, hands, eyes bright with recognition and hope. Children, adults, elders, all of them bearing the same quiet, patient air as Liana. They were the forgotten ones. The promises left unkept. The memories misplaced but not destroyed. They watched you pass, their faces soft with gratitude, as if your simple act of carrying a letter had lifted a weight from the world they inhabited. At the far end of the garden stood a gate. It was made of wrought iron, delicate as lace, twined through with living vines that bloomed with pale silver flowers. The gate stood open, leading into a space that shimmered too brightly for you to see clearly. Liana stopped before it. She turned to you once more, and this time there was something almost solemn in her expression. "You found the way," she said. "You listened when no one else would. You opened your mouth, and this time the words came. I just followed the rain," you said quietly. Liana laughed, a sound so pure and light that it seemed to set the very mist sparkling. "The rain remembers," she said. "The rain always remembers." She held out her hand again, and you saw that the letter you had returned to her had changed. It was no longer just paper and ink, it was glowing now, warm and steady like a tiny hut fire. She placed it carefully into a small niche beside the gate, where it settled among dozens, no, hundreds of other letters, each one burning softly with its own inner light. Each one a promise kept. Each one a memory reclaimed. You realized, then, that this place was not just a garden. It was a repository of all the promises this city had ever made to its people, to its children, to itself. Some had been fulfilled. Others had waited, like seeds in the dark earth, for someone willing to listen. And tonight, you had listened. You had become a part of this place. A part of its song. Liana stepped back and gave you a long, searching look, as if memorizing you, committing this moment to the endless archive of memory. "You can stay," she said softly, "if you wish." The offer hung in the misty air between you, tender and bright. You thought about it, about staying here, where time moved like a river of dreams, where the rain sang lullabies and the light was always soft, always kind. But you thought, too, of the city. The real city. The streets and alleys. The cold lamplight. The faces bowed against the rain, the small kindnesses that often went unseen. You thought of the promises still being made, even now, by people who didn't even realize how precious they were. You shook your head gently. "I have to go back," you said. Liana nodded, not with sadness, but with understanding. "You'll remember," she said, "and that will be enough." You took one last look at the garden, at the shimmering trees, the mist, the stars rising like a prayer, and then turned back toward the path you had come from. As you moved, the figures among the trees raised their hands in silent farewell. And when you passed back through the door, it closed behind you with a soft, contented sigh. You were back in the long, narrow corridor of the Remembrance House. The brass key in your pocket was warm. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle murmur, as if the city itself was settling into a well-earned sleep. You walked slowly back through the house, through the empty rooms filled with the echoes of memory, until you reached the front door. The old handle turned easily under your hand. You stepped out into the street, where the last drops of rain kissed your face like blessings. The lamplight flickered above you, not with weariness, but with quiet joy. The city was different now. Or perhaps you were. Either way, you knew you would never walk these streets the same way again. You would see the small things. Hear the faintest whispers. Remember the promises made in passing and honor them even when no one else was watching. Because you had listened. And because somewhere, under the endless, whispering rain, the city was listening too. The city was quieter than you remembered. It was as if the rain had washed away not just the streets, but the noise of the world, leaving only the soft pulse of the night. The lamplights flickered with a new warmth, their golden glow spilling gently across the cobblestones. The wind whispered through the alleys, carrying with it the faintest hum, like the echo of an old lullaby. You stood for a moment in the doorway of the Remembrance House, the cool air wrapping around you like a soft embrace, and the sense of something new in the city hung heavy in the air. The promise had been fulfilled. Liana's garden, the garden of lost promises and memories, was now a place of peace, where the whispers of the past had settled into stillness. Each promise kept, each memory returned, and woven itself into the fabric of the world, like the threads of an ancient tapestry finally brought back together. You had listened, and you had honored that silence, that waiting. You had brought closure to a chapter that had been suspended in time. But now, as the city stretched out before you, alive with the soft glow of the rain-kissed lamplights, you knew that the work was not done. There were still promises waiting, still hearts in the shadows that needed to be remembered. You stepped out into the street. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, painting the world in shades of silver and gray. The lamplights, once cold and distant, now seemed to shine brighter, warmer, almost like friends reaching out to welcome you home. There was something about this night, something about the way the city had shifted, that felt different. It felt like a place where people would begin to remember again. A place where promises would no longer be forgotten. As you walked, you thought of the people who lived here, the ones who passed through the streets, the ones who hurried with their umbrellas, their coats pulled tight against the cold. They didn't know about the garden, about the letters, about Liana. They didn't know about the promises made under the lamplight. They didn't know that somewhere, in the deepest corners of the city, there were lost promises still waiting for someone to listen. But now, you could hear them. Every step you took through the wet streets, every turn around a corner, every shadow you passed, all of it spoke to you. The city was alive with whispers. You could almost hear the unspoken words floating in the air, carried by the wind. Remember me, they seemed to say. Do not forget. You wondered if others could hear them too. You wondered if they had ever noticed the lamplights flickering just a little brighter on certain nights, or if they had felt that same gentle pull, that same quiet call to listen. It was a call to all who could hear it, but only those who truly stopped to listen would ever understand. As you continued down the cobblestone streets, the sound of your footsteps seemed to fade into the background, as if the night itself had wrapped itself around you. It was a peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that fills the spaces between breaths, the kind that allows you to hear things you normally wouldn't notice. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving behind a mist that hung in the air like a soft memory. The city felt as if it were holding its breath. You turned a corner and found yourself standing before the old lamp. The one from the story, the one that had guided Liana, the one that had stood through all the years of waiting. The lamplight flickered softly, casting a golden glow across the wet pavement. The light was not harsh, not sharp, but tender, like the last breath of a sigh before sleep. You could feel its warmth even from where you stood, and for a moment, you felt as though the city itself had exhaled, as though all the waiting, all the lost promises, had finally found their place in the world. And then, you saw her. Liana. She stood there, just at the edge of the light, her figure soft and faint, like a memory come to life. Her dress shimmered in the lamplight, and her hair floated around her like a halo. She was not alone, though. There were others with her now, figures moving in and out of the shadows, their faces soft and familiar. The children, the adults, the lost ones, all of them gathered here, where the city had once forgotten them. Liana looked at you, her eyes full of that same quiet recognition, the same gentle sadness that had filled her expression in the garden. She was not sad anymore, though. There was peace in her gaze, a peace that came from knowing that her story, and the stories of all the others, had finally been heard. You stepped closer to her, drawn by the pull of the lamplight, by the pull of promises kept. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and familiar. "For listening. For remembering." You nodded, but words felt too small for this moment. All you could do was stand there, in the quiet of the night, and allow yourself to feel the weight of what had been given. Liana smiled, the same smile that had once been full of longing, now full of peace. "It is done," she said softly. "The promises are no longer lost. The city will remember." You stood with her for a long while, the night stretching around you, the lamplight glowing softly above, casting gentle shadows on the wet streets. There were no words now, only the quiet comfort of knowing that everything had come full circle, that the stories of the forgotten ones had found their place, and that the city had finally listened. When you looked back, the figure of Liana was no longer standing alone. The others had gathered around her, a quiet procession of souls who had been waiting for so long, their faces full of gratitude. They, too, seemed at peace, their figures glowing softly in the lamplight, like stars finding their place in the sky. You turned and began to walk away, but not in the same way you had come. You walked now with a quiet understanding, a calm that filled the spaces between your steps. The lamplight flickered again, brighter this time, as if sending you off with one last soft embrace. The city was still. The streets were empty now, save for the soft whispers of rain that had passed, the faintest sound of a lullaby carried on the wind. You walked into the night, knowing that the promises made under the lamplight would not be forgotten, that they would live on in the quiet moments, in the soft murmur of the rain, in the flicker of the lamplights, and in the hearts of those who listened. The city had changed. Or perhaps you had. But as you walked under the glow of the lamplight, you knew that some things would always remain. Some promises would always be kept. And in the end, that was enough. As the night gently wraps around you, let the peacefulness of this story linger in your heart. The city sleeps, and so should you, knowing that the whispers of forgotten promises have found their place, and the lamplights continue to watch over us, soft and steady, through every quiet night. Let the calmness of this moment settle into your mind, and feel the weight of your day fade away. The rain has passed, the stars are shining, and the world is quiet. It is now your turn to rest, to drift into sleep, where dreams will carry you to peaceful places, where you are always safe and at ease. Remember, the whispers are never truly gone. They are always there, gentle and kind, waiting for someone to listen. And tonight, it was you. So, take a deep breath. Allow yourself to relax completely. The night is yours, a quiet journey into rest. Sleep well, and know that tomorrow will bring new light, new stories, and new promises waiting to be kept. Good night.